Okay, so this is our teaching approach that we've been using in New York City for the last couple of years. We started this approach, or I really should say Tim started this approach back in 2016-ish for teaching newcomers to how to ring. Of course, and the tower was shut down first for renovation, and then, of course, because of the pandemic. So there is a gap, but then we picked it back up when the tower reopened a couple of years ago. Um, and I want to start by saying this is just how we have approached things in New York. This is what we do, and everyone else should do it the same way. We fully recognize that there are different methods, or ways of teaching for all different, towers, teachers, students. Um, and I think during some of the billing for this program, it said something like what work and what doesn't work. And we actually are not intending to cover anything that we think doesn't work. This is just how we've been approaching things and have seen a modicum of success on. So, um, with that, also, if you do have any questions, feel free. I think both Tom and Tim said this. Feel free to put them in the chat, and Tim will answer as we go through. He unfortunately can't speak very much at the moment, but we're gonna continue on nonetheless. Okay. Um, so we'll just be going through the different training, or sorry, the training approach from bell handling, slow motion rounds. We'll explain what that is. Rounds and call changes, stepping. That is also something I'm not sure I've seen very much at other towers, so I'm not sure how widespread that is. And then the different bell control exercises that ultimately lead into method ringing. Um, so, for bell handling, and I should note, I think this was largely stolen from Greg. Um, in ter when you're starting to teach, you start to teach the student using backstrokes only. You have them pause on the balance, then you flip it over to hand strokes only with the student again pausing on the balance at hand. Um, and then you get the student to start to ring below the balance without hand stroke. Sorry, just using backstrokes only without hand strokes. Then you start to get them to start to touch the sally and pull the hand stroke with one hand. Then you slowly bring them to start using two hands, and then you gradually work back up to ring both strokes closer to the balance. And then this also protects the stay from, accidentally over pulling and being broken. Um, and then, of course, having the student ring up and down their bell, which in addition to that's sort of the marker for, okay, this person is now safe to ring on their own, gives the student a lot of experience in terms of, or practice for, raising and lowering, which is ultimately what we do in method ringing, just at a quicker scale. And then, of course, as you're going through, diagnosing handling issues along the way, of course, a lot of us see floating hands, but also I find that students will do things where they stop their pull too short. And there's a lot that can go wrong with handling, but if you keep trying to diagnose or correct the issue along the way, then there's the easier it is for it to fix. Um, and the thing that we find is that a milestone for handling is when the student can ring their bell at the balance for 10 whole pulls. So, they're setting it at hand, setting it at back, and whether they are just pulling it over the balance or if they're gently setting it either way. The idea is that if they can get their bell to the balance confidently without over pulling and hitting the stay, that is a quite a good marker that they are ready to move on to. Right. So slow motion rounds, you pull off in rounds and you immediately set the every bell at backstroke. And then you continue to do this where you set the bell at every stroke, ideally for about, 10 whole pulls. Okay. So slow motion rounds, pulsing at the balance. This is something that we do at Trinity um, very, very frequently. And it's one of my personal favorite exercises. When I was just learning to ring on higher numbers, um, there was a visiting ringer named many of you who know, Dave Bassford, who came and rang at Trinity. And um, we pulled off in rounds. I hit the stay, and he bet me a beer that I wouldn't hit the stay, and I did. So I went back to Smith and um, started every single practice by setting each of the bells at backstroke and then handstroke, and I wholly attribute a lot of my own developmental progress to that. So I'll just say that this is slow motion rounds. Seems very silly, but it is one of my personal favorites, and in terms of developing bell control and ringing at the balance. Okay, so more on the importance of call changes. Of course, many of the skills that you use for call changes, uh, as I said, paves the way to method ringing. Primarily bell control, rope sight, and striking. And the people who are going to stay on that track, are just as important as people who will go on to become, in the upper echelons or the black zone of method ringing, and yeah, and it should be treated as the important exercise that it is. And in particular, as a way for I find it's an excellent Sunday, service touch, Sunday service ringing, for everybody to be involved in. All right. Then a step beyond, so to speak, a step beyond call changes, when ringers are starting to figure out how to ring call changes as well, is to move on to stepping, which can be done on a number of bells, but here we're showing it on 4. So you take a learner, you start them off we've found the 2 is a good place to start them, just so that way they're not troubling and figuring out how to lead. And then every 2 whole pulls or every 4 blows, they change the place that they're ringing in. And so, they slowly move up or step up to 5th place, and then they come back down. And so it's almost like an automated call change, but it gets them, moving their bell around more quickly than you might do in call changes. And it's a great counting exercise for the rest of the band, particularly the person on the 3. As you can see, it has a lot of time to be ringing in seconds place, and so therefore you may want to put a slightly more advanced learner on the 3 or around the person who's actually doing the stepping as a rope sight exercise, because then it forces that person to see, okay, when is the 2 ringing over me, and then I'm going to have to switch places with them. And even though the exercise is primarily for the 2 or the learner who is on the 2, it gives a good counting exercise for the rest of the band. And then, of course, you can do this with one whole pull. So, a hand stroke, backstroke, in, seconds through fifths. And again, just getting the learner used to moving their bell around, and particularly, slotting in quickly, as opposed to, sometimes especially if you're ringing around some call changes, you might ring in 2, 2.5, 2 3/4, and then get up into 3 or however. So yeah, the idea is to get them moving the bell around. That brings us to moving on to method ringing, and primarily some of the skills that you need to move from call changes into method ringing. Obviously, primarily bell control, rope sight, striking and method recall. Um, and the thing that we really wanted to focus on here, and what we'll spend much more the rest of the presentation on, is that um, with most towers, of course, you start to learn, plain bob and, or you, not most, I shouldn't say most, but with many towers, you do go into learning plain bob and Grancer. Uh, as most of you know, we primarily use, well, we'll talk about it in a minute, but we primarily use Aaron and Kent, or Trouble Bob Hunt. And the reason for that is to get the bell control, um, is to get the bell control into muscle memory. And because those methods use much more moving the bell around, um, that it really highlights the first essential skill of method ringing, which is bell control. Okay, and so with that, but first of all, we have the learners go through a sort of brief period of exercises to build them up to method ringing, and we have them go through sort of building on what we believe is building on their previous skills. So number one is covering off of changing bells. So, bells 1 through 5 are ringing anything. They could be ringing plain Hunt, they could be ringing Kent doubles, or sorry, Stedman doubles. And the idea for the tenor is to just see who they're ringing over and be able to identify who they're ringing over. Then we have leading off of changing bells. So essentially the reverse of that, where they're just leading. The back 4 or the back 5 are changing around in some kind of fashion, and the learner has to identify who they're leading off of, without it just being the consistent tenor. Then of course places and long places, dodging. Then we have them move on to Cambridge places, and that allows them to start getting used to blue lines in a fashion, or at least some sort of pattern that is even more so than anything that they've seen before. Trouble Bob hunting on 2. So, a dodge and a place, a dodge and a place. Again, it's also a very good exercise for, a quote unquote helper to do with a student. And then Stedman whole turns and Cambridge front work. These last 2 we're not convinced of, and in fact, many of the steps that we have laid out for ourselves, we skip over, and we do tend to skip over those last 2. But we do have most our all our learners go through a period of really learning to identify how to whip their bell around just within 2 places, with this set of exercises. And then that brings us to method learning. So we of course start, with learning on 3, which is not always the case. I mean, certainly when I was learning, I think, the idea was, start off ringing plain bob on 5, which again was fine for that time. But we do feel that it's quite a bit of a jump, and having these intermittent stages where you're really learning how to move the bell around, and recognize the patterns on 3 is quite useful. So we'll start off with Trouble Bob Hunt on 3, then go to Aaron and Stedman singles, then go to Trouble Bob Hunt on 4, then go to Aaron Minimus and Kent Minimus. And then, as you can see, there's a lot of Trouble Bob hunting. Trouble Bob Hunt on 5, Aaron and Stedman doubles, Trouble Bob Hunt on 6. Then let that be the stepping stone to both Kent and then Cambridge minor, and then finally Aaron and Stedman triples. As you can see, there's a lot of treble bob hunting on here. And even for stages that you might not think about, that would have a treble bob hunt um, pattern, particularly for the odd stages, we have found that it can be useful for some learners because one of the things that many people struggle with when they are ringing on a new stage is getting up into that next n minus one or n place. So if somebody's been used to ringing on four, and they have to get up into five, they have to spend four blows ringing in fifths, and that really can help solidify, okay, this is what I need to do to actually get up into that place. Um, and certainly these are not meant to be as linear as they're laid out here. You can certainly start on a next stage before you finish the first one. But we have found that some learners, really appreciate and do better with starting, say, on five and then moving to six, particularly because it can still be tough to lead off changing bells. Even though you might be used to doing it in rounds and whatnot. Um, and another benefit is that with most if not all of these, but actually up until you hit Kent and Cambridge Minor, is that you can have the learner ring the treble and then they get a lot more practice at leading, which is also we have found to be quite helpful because especially when people are so used to ringing in rounds, when if you have to stand something up or otherwise, they get used to leading off of not only the tenor but different people, and we've found that some people can struggle with that unless they get a lot of practice, and that's a way to get more practice. But any questions on this in particular? No? Okay.
I know
Yeah,
you seem
I
to have.
apologize. I have to drop off, but this is really interesting.
Okay. Um,
I have a quick question. Just tell me what Trouble Bob Hunt is on three. I don't know what that means.
oh, so you dodge one, two up, and then you spend four places ringing in thirds, and then you dodge one, two down, lead one, two up, four places ringing in thirds, one, two down.
Thank you.
So it's essentially like long places at the back.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see Grancer in any of this so far.
Correct. We don't really teach Grancer until it kind of comes up outside of this. Yeah, we do not include either Plain Bob or Grancer, and that is because we have found that um, that the Aaron and Treble Bob hunting, primarily approach leads to you get a lot of different types of ways that you pull into the methods that you're rigging. When you're rigging Plain Bob and Grancer, the vast majority of it is plain hunting, and when you're plain hunting, you're primarily in a steady state. You're either slowly, coming down to lead, or you're slowly going up to the back, and that is one type of pulling. And then you get the dodge in 3/4 at least in doubles and minor for Plain Bob, but but you only get one dodge and it's always right. When you go through Aaron and Treble Bob hunting, you get right dodges in a number of different places. You get wrong dodges in a number of different places. And in nearly every single pull involves a change in exactly how hard you're pulling, whether you're pulling harder, or pulling less, resisting as you either catch the sally or you're pulling the backstroke. So nearly every single pull involves some kind of change, and that allows the learner to get just exponentially more practice at controlling their bell, and it really ingrains it in their muscle memory a a lot quicker. Um, so this is the core of why we have taken this approach, in the way that we've laid this out. So you're right that it does not include Grancer and Plain Bob, and frankly, we don't. It's usually somebody turns up at the tower as a visitor and says, "Oh, can we ring Grancer?" And that's when we teach our students how to ring Grancer or Plain Bob. And yeah, we've had, like I mentioned at the beginning, we've had a modicum of success with this. First of all, every student is different. So we do have 4 students who started in 2023 who between them are ringing stem and doubles, stem and triples. Cambridge major. I think I saw Sam on the call, and that's him. And we even have a student who's ringing Erin Sings, who just rang her first quarter of Erin Sings last month. So yeah, I do want to note that we also have learners who haven't gotten out of the rounds and call changes stage, and that's something that they are still working on, and they are still coming along and still learning. But with this approach, we have seen some students get into this quite intermediate to advanced zone of ringing in a very short period of time. And ultimately our goal is to build up a band for in New York, for Erin and Stedman caters and sings, and of course Kent and eventually surprise Royal and Max. Of course, that is the goal. It might take many years to get there, but that's essentially why we've developed this. Again, another reason why we've developed the training plan in the way that we have. But yeah, we've seen it work quite well. Any other questions?
Very good. Well, thank you so much.
Of
I'm going to
course.
stop the recording, but we can still talk some more.
Counting places, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Are you having people count from early stages, or is there something else in terms of helping them keep their place?
Oh, no, I definitely think I would say counting we have them count starting from just about the beginning. But I think there are some exercises that also help focus on rope sight, like the stepping in particular. I would say is aimed at, or at least, sorry, the stepping at least for the say for the other people who are moving around the person who's doing the stepping. For them it's a rope sight exercise, because they're just going to be ringing, the person who's on the 3 is just going to be ringing in seconds place until they see that the 2 is now ringing after them, and so they know, okay, now I know I have another 2 whole blows before they're back to ring underneath me. So I do think while we try to encourage using rope sight, we primarily, yeah, I guess I would say that we primarily focus on counting, on having people count. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
And I do want to stress one more time that this is not necessarily we do not view this as the end all be all. It is very much open to further comments and scrutiny. And in fact, we do think when we first laid out all of the steps that we thought students should be going through, there were 60 of them. And we're trying to figure out how to trim those down, because we think that people probably don't need 60 individual steps. But that is the final number is TBD. And of course it changes with every student. So
And I think a number of us might appreciate having those slides all available to us to keep track of what some of the things you're doing is.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Tom, if I send them to you, could you disseminate it?
I can, yeah.
Yeah,
Kira, I have a question.
go for
I'm
it.
just wondering if you have separate practices for beginners, or you try to use your more experienced ringers in and around people as they're learning through, as they're going through all your steps.
Um, both. We currently have two weekly practices, or ideally two. Sometimes we have to cancel one. Where one is a regular practice and the other alternates between being a quote unquote advanced and a quote unquote beginners. And I use quote unquote because the line that we've drawn there is essentially our advanced is stem and doubles and above, and our beginners is everything up to just about stem and doubles, and everything from handling and learning how to handle up to that. I will say I think that strategy is relatively new and it's worked out well, but it also is um, for our tower and just who we have, and we have certain people who travel from quite far away and don't want to come in for two practices a week, so that's how we've broken it out. But we did think it was important that we didn't just have a separate beginner and advanced, and that were everyone gets together fairly regularly. And because we do think it's important for the beginners not only to be surrounded and have the helpers fill out, but also they get to see, oh, what does a touch of Cambridge Minor look like, or Cambridge Major, and so that they can see what the end goal is, or not the end goal, but what is the possibility for what I can ring and work my way up to, if that's if that's what they want to do.
Great, thanks.
Kira, sort of related to that, when you have a newcomer show up, say for the first time, do you go over that and explain that it might take a couple of years to get to that level of skill? And if so, do they respond and say, great, sign me up, I'm willing to do this for 2 years? Or how do you handle that first part?
That's an excellent question, and I'm only now just realizing we don't do that. We actually did print out a book with the 60 steps in it, so that we could point and say, here, look at this for 2 minutes, and then we're going to ring it. So I think our learners have some idea of, okay, that we're presumably going to work our way through this book. And if I think when people show up saying they want to handle, we probably say, it's probably going to take at least a couple months to learn how to handle a bell before you're ready to move on to to other things. But that's a good question. I don't think we explicitly say, hey, this is a multi-year process. Maybe we should talk about that. Actually, hang on. Is Sam still on the call? I'm curious to hear. Sam, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if you're willing, what was your impression when you came back?
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I already knew that it was going to take a while to even get up to intermediate beginner level. And I'm a generally persistent person, so I'm not sure I'm the average example of person wandering into the tower.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I'm not
Okay,
sure if
thanks.
I can add much more. Thanks.
That's interesting. I'm sure it varies. And you'll have some who will come up and say, oh, that was interesting, and that's the last time I'm going to do that. And then others who will persist with it and learn all those steps.
We've had a number of those as well. I do think it's just everybody is so different.
Yeah, sure. Yep. All right, thanks.
I also do want to highlight the work that Tim has done on this. I've gotten it to present it because he's sick, but this is a lot of this is his brainchild. So he's put in a lot of thought and work to this, to the program and to our students.
Jerry, what do you think? Is that a good time to stop the recording?
I do. I do. I think we can keep talking.
Yeah.